Hey everyone, this is Bevo from a couple of hours after this video was recorded. Literally as I went to upload it, the game was patched and things were fixed, so things that I say are broken may not be at this point, but I'm going to find that out when this video releases because I will also be streaming on YouTube as soon as this drops so we can see if anything's gotten fixed at this point. And tomorrow I'll be making a video on the patch notes themselves. So I apologize for any inaccuracies. This literally just released and I did not see it coming because I'm stupid. Anyways, to the video. So I've been sitting on making this video for a while, partly because I kind of already made a video about this, but then I thought, well, I shouldn't have used the CJ4, which was in my how to use autopilot video, because I mean, not everyone's going to use the CJ4, and the CJ4 is a little more unique than the rest of the aircraft in terms of how the autopilot works. So today's video, we're going to go over the autopilot in planes that primarily use Garmin systems, like the Cessna 172 or the Beechcraft or any aircraft like that, that have more simple and kind of universal autopilot buttons, I guess, as to where they are and how they work and all that. I mean, overall the concept's still going to be the same, and I kind of covered this in my Cessna 172 video, but I also want to cover Garmin systems in this video. Now, another big reason why I've sat on this video is because autopilot sucks and the Garmin systems suck. And the reason I say that is because, well, they objectively do. I actually played X-Plane for the first time in my life this weekend on my grandfather's sim rig. Yes, I said my grandfather's sim rig. It's very intense and infinitely nicer than mine. He set me up with just a little flight to show me some stuff, and I went on and I was like, okay, well, he didn't put in a flight plan or anything like that because he does it different, and he expected me to do it different, just VFR, all that kind of thing. But I was like, no, I've got the waypoints on here because he charted it out, and so I'll just add them in the Garmin system and use autopilot. And I actually had difficulties with autopilot in X-Plane only because I had difficulties in Microsoft Flight Sim because they actually work in X-Plane, which makes sense. I mean, it's a game that's been around for a while, so it's going to be doing things right. But it just kind of blew my mind to see how nice things could be, and kind of what makes me retract part of what I said in the Flight Sim Sucks video, in that I don't know how much I can forgive them for making autopilot and Garmin systems so shitty. But regardless of that, here we are today. We're going to go over all of the features of autopilot front and back, and I'll let you know what works and what doesn't. And then for the Garmin systems, well, again, I'm going to show you what works and what doesn't. So with that being said, let's get into the game. Alright, so here we are on the ground, and I know I said Cessna 172 in Beechcraft, but we're actually going to be taking out the Bonanza. But again, this runs a Garmin that's similar to the 172, and still pretty similar to the Beechcraft, except the Beechcraft's Garmin is touchscreen, but the idea is still pretty much the same. So let's get into autopilot, and a lot of this, again, is going to be kind of repetitive for people who saw my other video or are already familiar with autopilot, so I apologize for that, but it's still important that we go over all the components. That way you're not lost in any of this. So first off, autopilot itself is going to be over on this right monitor, top left, engage autopilot, turn it on, turn it off as you wish. On the left screen here, we can see our compass and this blue bug right here. That's going to be our heading, which if we adjust the dial right above the autopilot on the right monitor or on the left monitor over here, we can change our heading to our desired input. Now, I have no flight plan loaded right now, so it doesn't matter, but I mean, you can see that it's changing right here. And how you would activate that is simply go down below the autopilot button and hit heading select on, and that activates it, so your autopilot will follow that heading. Now to the right of that, we have our flight director, and what that's going to do, and it's actually already on, is we can see on our left navigation display that we have just these yellow lines. If you turn on your flight director, it's going to give you this purple line, and it's going to show you what autopilot's doing for the most part, which is just handy so you're aware how far your plane is pitching and why it's pitching and all that kind of thing. It just gives you a better read on what's happening, and that's kind of preferential to keep on or off. I mean, I usually put it on just so I'm aware. Now below that, we have our altitude hold mode, and remember, all of this is going to be on the right monitor. For planes that have the same configuration, like the 172, that's going to be the same. Or things like the Beechcraft, it's going to be in a different place, but they serve the same function. But altitude hold mode on, if we turn it on, that's going to be the desired altitude that we want to keep our plane at. and that works off of autopilot. All these things work off of autopilot. So as you can see, when we turn it on, we get a number right up here, and that's going to be our desired altitude. It auto set to 200, which is fine. If we go ahead and increase it, we can change it as much as we want, you know, say 5,000. And that's on the bottom left of the right monitor here. And the big knob is how you change the thousands, little knob is how you change the hundreds. So you can be as specific as you choose to be. Next up, we'll talk about nav mode. Nav mode is pretty much autopilot easy mode in terms of following your path. So if I had a flight plan set and I turned on nav mode, it would follow it and it would just disregard heading mode, because it would just be straight on the path and go to each waypoint as you need to go, which is pretty handy for long haul flights. I guess if you don't want to do anything, I tend to use it a lot, but that's because I'm lazy. Not that there's anything wrong with using nav mode, it's just all preferential, because you can do the same thing with heading mode, you just have to manually do it. So next up we have VNV mode, which is basically like vertical nav mode, which is going to essentially cover dealing with your ascent and descent, that kind of deal. But last I heard, it doesn't work. So in theory, the way you would use it is whenever you take off and you throw on autopilot, you can put on nav mode and then put on the VNV mode. That's basically going to handle your climbs and descents pretty much for you without having to climb or descend on your own or using the other autopilot features to do so. But again, it isn't really functional at this point, to my knowledge. Please feel free to correct me if I'm wrong on that, but everything I've seen and even trying it on it seems to have no effect whatsoever. So moving on, next we have approach mode. Approach mode is used for ILS landings, and basically what it's going to do is have the same effect as nav mode, but whenever you're coming on your descent, it'll also handle the ILS component, getting you lined up on the runway and finding a glide slope to go down. Now, if you want to learn more about that in particular, I did cover that in this video right up here. So next we have the back course mode, which I don't really ever use, and you can use, but it kind of goes beyond the scope of this video. But that's more so for more advanced landings and ILS, and I'm not going to be covering that today. So for the purposes of using autopilot, it's really not all that important for you to know at this stage. Now, next we have two functions that allow you to climb and descend beyond VNV mode, and these are going to be the two that you'll probably use the most because, well, VNV mode doesn't work. So first off, we have vertical speed mode. Now what this does is it sets autopilot to a particular vertical speed, aka your rate of climb. So how fast you're climbing or how fast you're descending, you can choose it with that. Now this is handy if you don't need to control your speed or anything like that, and you just want to full throttle out and gain a lot of altitude pretty quickly and easily. You can go ahead and turn that on, and if you hit vertical speed mode, you'll see we just got a 0 up here, and if we hit to the right of it, we have nose up and nose down. If we do nose up, we see a bug appear next to our altitude, and that's going to show our rate of climb, which in this case is 1300. If we go down, we can see our rate of descent, which, you know, it goes to 600, negative 600 if we choose it to do that. And that's primarily used for if you don't really care about your speed that you're ascending or descending at. Now, if you do care, and there's many times in which you should, in some cases your speed is restricted by air traffic control, and you want to make sure that's the case, or you just don't want to stall out, which is another big thing in small planes, or you're in a jet and you don't want to overspeed, then you would want to use FLC mode, and it's kind of the more common mode because it's a safer mode. So if you hit FLC mode, you would then go ahead and set a speed. So it works the same way, where if you hit FLC mode, we see something pop up above the speed and it just says 1, so that's 1 knot. If you do your nose up and nose down, that's going to control what speed it's set to, so you can get it up to whatever number you want to. And if you start clicking rapidly, it goes faster. So we'll say, you know, 161 knots. And then the plane is going to pitch up or pitch down to maintain that speed, which is nice. So all you need to do is control the throttle and make sure if you want to climb, increase throttle, and if you want to climb more aggressively, power up the throttle real hard, and your plane is going to pitch to correct for that. And same for descending. If you want to descend and you want to hold a speed of, you know, you want to stay below 140 knots or within 140 knots, you just kind of manage the throttle and the plane will pitch accordingly. And how you manage the throttle is going to depend on your rate of descent or ascent. But the biggest thing is that your throttle's controlled, which means you won't stall out or you won't overspeed, which is really cool. Now before we get in the air, so I can demonstrate the autopilot functions more practically, we'll go ahead and discuss some of the features of the Garmin system and kind of how to navigate it. Now I want to kind of start with this. Now like a lot of things in this game, the Garmin systems don't really work all that well, or they're not very user-friendly at this point. I can say that because I used a system identical to this when I was doing that X-Plane flight this weekend, and I had no trouble whatsoever. But we'll kind of go over what works and what doesn't work, and show you just a couple of little features throughout it. Now first we're going to start with setting our comms. This is something I like to do just because it's a little immersive, and because I do autopilot so much, I mean I tend to not have that much to do in the cockpit, so whenever air traffic control's like, oh, switch over to, you know, 125.50, then I can do that and just have something to do, I guess. But the way that you go about that is we can see in the top we have our COM 1 and COM 2. Now this one right here is going to be our standby, and this is going to be what we're using, our active radio. So if we want to change that, we're going to go look at this knob right here, and that's how we're going to start adjusting. So the big knob's going to be the left numbers, so if we wanted to go to 125.500, we just turn this one notch, the big knob, and then the little knob we can decrease and go to 50. Now, I personally don't like the knob systems because they take a little long, and honestly, it's kind of unclear as to what you're doing. I mean, you can see the arrow change increase and decrease a little bit, but sometimes it's hard to tell, and they're so close that, like, you move in a weird way, or the plane's moving, you sometimes botch it. So it's kind of odd, and in X-Plane, it's a lot nicer because you get a big arrow, like a very clearly big arrow, and it's just not too many problems. But you know, that's just a little preferential. On the touchscreen ones, it's easier, so you literally just click here and then you can type it in the screen. It's easy. But so that's set, and if we want to switch our frequency, now that it's set, we just hit this arrow right here and we swap standby and active, and looky there, we're on 125.500, and our standby is now our old active, and we can change that if we want. Now next, in terms of setting destinations and I guess flight plans, let's talk about destinations before we get into flight plans, because flight plans is going to be a whole different conversation. So right here we have all our little buttons to get to places and see things. Very well said, Bevo. But the second button, which is NRST, stands for nearest, and then we can find the nearest airports to us. And you just adjust this knob here to scroll through and see which ones you want. So let's say we want to go to this airport, we just scroll to it like we just did, and then we would use the buttons on the bottom right of the left nav screen, and we just hit set direct course to, and it's going to take us to 21SC Darlington, South Carolina, and we can just hit enter to activate. So if we look over on our right nav monitor and zoom out, we can see, zoom in, we can see that we have a new line and it's leading to that destination. So let's say you didn't want to go there and you want to change where you're heading. To do that, you just hit menu and then hit delete flight plan, and then it'll take a second, but it'll update here. And that's kind of how you navigate around doing that. So you can check your flight plan right here. So in all honesty, in terms of setting a flight plan, my recommendation would be to avoid doing it through the Garmin system itself, mainly because it takes forever and it doesn't really work, and it's not very user-friendly in its current state. And I know that because I use this exact Garmin system, like I said, in X-Plane, and it worked perfectly. I mean, it still took a little while because it was all dials and stuff like that, but it wasn't really accessible. So if you're gonna if you want to like put your flight plan in on the ground, if you don't want to set it ahead of time, I really recommend using one of the flight planner websites, and then you can just simply download it, and then when you hit escape, you can do you know, load a flight plan, and that just makes it infinitely easier, and then it loads up into your systems fine. Which, I mean, it's I guess not as immersive, but it kind of makes sense to do it that way anyways, and it's just so much easier. I mean, if you're not worried about doing IFR, and IFR is kind of the bigger deal, you can just do what I just did and select nearest. Alternatively, you can hit active flight plan and click the selection cursor and then move the small knob, and that'll get you to where you can set your whatever location you want to go to, and just dial it through there. So you use the little knob to adjust the letters like you're seeing here, and then the big knob to move to a different space. And then eventually it'll pop up and you'll just hit enter. So, well, we just put 828, which isn't a thing because I accidentally hit enter, but you know, you see the point, things show up, and that's how you would just pick to where you're going. But that's really only reliable for VFR, because trying to put in every waypoint that you want to go to for IFR and setting your approach and all that, just, it takes too long. And I tried. I promise you, I tried making a video on it. I tried doing it myself, and I did it for an hour and a half, and I wasn't even off the ground, and it wasn't even working. And it's just, maybe in the future things will get better. In the meantime, let's get up in the air, and I'll just kind of rehash some of the autopilot features. So let's do it. Okay, so we're now in the air. So what I'm going to do is, I've already set a course to just some random place nearby. We want to climb, but we're having trouble because of our airspeed right now, kind of because I took off a little early. So if we go ahead and engage autopilot, we can turn that on and hit nav mode, and we're going to start heading to our GPS route. We can see our flight director kind of indicating how we're going to be turning just, you know, in a few seconds from now. So the next thing we want to do is, well, we want to get up to 6,000 feet, and I want to do it by controlling my speed since I'm in a slow aircraft. So I've got FLC mode on now, and I'm full throttle, so the plane is going to start arcing up very aggressively, as we can see here, to try and compensate and keep that speed down. But that's a little more aggressive than I'd like, so I'm probably going to just rack down the throttle a little bit here. So once the speed leveled out, we are still climbing. Our ascent rate is pretty reasonable, 900 overall, just to try and keep and maintain that speed, which is really nice. So that's just kind of a more functional use of this. The alternative would be for me to set my vertical speed, and if I went and did that right now and nosed it up, and let's say we want to go even more aggressive to like 1300, well, we're probably going to lose a whole lot of speed. Yeah, you can see it's just ticking down, and that just, I mean, that makes you more prone to stall. So FLC is definitely the more safe and the more proper way to do it. So we are currently level at the moment just because I lost a lot of airspeed doing that, but as you can see, our rate of climb is increasing over time. So it's just, I mean, it's a little slower, but I mean, it depends on what aircraft you're in. In this case, it's going to be pretty slow because I'm in a slow aircraft. But when you're in something like a jet, it's, you know, going to be a lot faster and a lot more controlled. And it's nicer in jets because they normally have an auto throttle, which makes things really convenient. So currently nav mode is active, which is why we are following this line to the T. But let's say we didn't want to use nav mode and we wanted to turn on heading mode. Our heading bug's already set to 312 degrees. So if we went and turned that on right now, we would naturally bank right and head towards that heading, which is pretty simple overall. And I mean, heading mode's nice, especially if you want to just practice working with autopilots that don't have that nav mode, that aren't as advanced. And so you can just adjust and get yourself back on course as you need to. And with GPSs, it's pretty easy to track and figure out where you need to go. Now, one final thing is we have our barometric pressure, which is right here, the bottom knob, not the triangle knob up here. Oh, and I just messed with that. And this is, the bottom knob is how you would increase or decrease your barometric pressure, and mine's just 29.902, so pretty simple stuff. Beyond that, in terms of the Garmin stuff, you also have the option on the left monitor to put in what's called an inset, and that effectively just gives you the right monitor, but stuck into the left. So if you wanted to just focus on this side, then you can, and you can have just a quick, easy view of your nav and where you are in regards to your course. For example, I'm very off course, but that's okay, no big deal. Next, in the lower menu, you have a PFD, which allows you to do a lot of options. First is wind. You have 3 options of how to see that. You can see your crosswind, just where the wind's coming from, to not wind from the west. And then option 3 is to give you the direction and knots, which is nice and convenient. Next, you have DME and BRG, which are really only important for a radio nav. I mean, you can look at them and explore them, but the next thing I'll show you is the HSI FRMT, which really just allows you to change the way this compass looks, which is really nice. You can have the 360 degree right there, so you can see everything, or you can bring it down and just do an arc, which also gives you some ILS information here, which is pretty convenient. And then next you have the CDI, which is just changing pretty much how your aircraft which is pretty much just changing the navigation for your aircraft and would affect nav mode primarily and some other things. So you can change VOR1, VOR2, and then your FMS, which is normally the standard one because that's just going to be your flight path. And then to the right of that you have your transponder, so your squawk. If you wanted to change your code, you just click the code button and then change it from here, and just click and select, and you can see what your current ident is right down here, and change that if you need to, but you don't normally need to. But I've been in situations where stuff happened or I accidentally changed it and I didn't know how, and that's just how. So that's pretty much it for the basic autopilot features, which I kind of have covered over the course of multiple videos, but never in one whole one. And I did cover autopilot itself in the CJ4, but I don't think that was good enough for reference, and also for the Garmin components. So I hope you found that informative, and if you did, make sure to let me know by liking and subscribing. And if you have any additional questions, please feel free to let me know in the comments, and I will try to answer as many as I can. Anyways, thanks for watching.